Arizona Territory, 1885. The early autumn sun bore down mercilessly on the Broken Spoke Ranch, baking the earth, and everyone unfortunate enough to be working outside. Amelia Barton, 23 years old with honey blonde hair tied back in a practical braid, stood over a sizzling cast-iron stove in the stifling cook shack. Sweat trickled down her temple as she kneaded dough with strong, capable hands. The isolation of the ranch suited her just fine. After what had happened back in Kansas City, she had come to believe that love was nothing but a pretty lie that led only to heartbreak and betrayal. Better to feed men than to love them, she muttered to herself, the phrase becoming something of a mantra over the 6 months since she'd taken this position. The ranch hands appreciated her cooking but kept their distance, respecting the invisible wall she had built around herself. Amelia had come west to escape her past, to find a place where no one knew her story. Here, she was simply the cook, nothing more, nothing less. No one asked questions about the sadness that sometimes clouded her green eyes when she thought no one was looking. No one needed to know about the man who had left her standing alone at the altar after discovering her family had lost their fortune. As she slid the bread into the oven, the cook shack door swung open, letting in a blast of hot air and dust. Blake Remington stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright light outside. At 26, he was the youngest trail boss the Broken Spoke had ever hired, but his reputation for handling both cattle and men had preceded him. With sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck and clear blue eyes, he'd caused quite a stir among the women in the nearby town of Pine Shadow when the cattle drive had passed through. "Miss Barton," he said, removing his hat and revealing a light sheen of sweat on his brow. "Mr. Hollis said you might have some coffee ready." "On the stove," she replied curtly, not meeting his eyes. She'd noticed the way he looked at her during meals, with curiosity rather than the usual hunger most cowboys showed, and it made her uncomfortable. Blake poured himself a cup and leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. Unlike the other hands, he always lingered, attempting small talk that she routinely rebuffed. "We'll be moving the herd to the north pasture tomorrow," he said, blowing on his coffee. "Might be gone for a few days." "I'll pack provisions," she answered, still focusing intently on the dough. "You know, Miss Barton, a good morning wouldn't crack that pretty face of yours," he said with a gentle smile. She finally looked up, her green eyes flashing. "I'm paid to cook, Mr. Remington, not to engage in pleasantries." He studied her for a moment. What makes a woman hide behind a stove like it's a fortress wall? The question caught her off guard. "I'm not hiding. Aren't you?" he challenged softly, then tipped his hat. "Thank you for the coffee, Miss Barton." As he turned to leave, she noticed a large tear in the back of his shirt, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin and the edge of what appeared to be a scar. "Your shirt," she said before she could stop herself. "It's torn." Blake twisted to look over his shoulder. "Had a disagreement with some mesquite yesterday." He shrugged. "I'll mend it later." "Nonsense," she found herself saying. "Leave it here. I'll fix it while you're working." A smile spread across his face. "Mighty kind of you, Miss Barton." Later that evening, as Amelia sat on the small porch of her quarters, she carefully stitched Blake's shirt by the light of a lantern. The ranch was quiet, most of the hands having turned in early for the long day ahead. She examined the tear carefully, noting the quality of the fabric. It was a good shirt, better than most cowboys wore. "Is my shirt salvageable?" Amelia startled at Blake's voice, nearly pricking her finger with the needle. He stood a few feet away, wearing a clean but worn undershirt that revealed strong arms and broad shoulders. "Mr. Remington, you should announce yourself before approaching a lady after dark," she admonished, trying to ignore the way her heart had quickened at his sudden appearance. "My apologies," he said, stepping into the circle of lantern light. "And it's Blake, please." "I've nearly finished," she said, making the final stitches. "Good as new." He sat on the step below her, watching her work. "Where did you learn to sew like that?" "Those are the neatest stitches I've seen outside of a tailor's shop." "My mother taught me," she replied, snipping the thread with small scissors. She believed a woman should be skilled with her hands. "She taught you well." Blake accepted the shirt, inspecting her work. "You can hardly tell it was torn." He looked up at her. "Thank you." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Amelia felt something stir within her that she'd thought long dead. Then she remembered Kansas City, remembered standing alone in a church filled with pitying glances, and the feeling withered. "You're welcome," she said, rising abruptly. "Good night, Mr. Remington." "Blake," he corrected gently. "And Amelia? Not all men are worth shutting out." Before she could respond, he was walking away, pulling his mended shirt over his head as he disappeared into the darkness. That night, Amelia lay awake, Blake's words echoing in her mind. How did he seem to see through her so easily? The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. The next morning dawned cool and clear. Amelia rose early, preparing breakfast for the hands heading out with the herd. As she placed platters of biscuits and gravy on the long table in the mess hall, she felt Blake's eyes on her. "Provisions are packed," she told him as he approached. "Should last you 3 days." "About that," he said, his voice low. "Mr. Hollis wants you to come with us. Says the men work better with your cooking." Amelia froze. "That's not part of my duties." "It is now," he replied, a hint of challenge in his eyes. "Unless you're afraid of something out there." "I'm not afraid," she shot back, bristling at his implication. "Good." His smile was warm, genuine. "We leave in an hour." Before she could protest further, Mr. Hollis, the ranch owner, confirmed the order, leaving her no choice. Within the hour, Amelia found herself perched on the seat of the chuck wagon, heading north with 20 cowboys, 300 head of cattle, and one infuriating trail boss who seemed determined to breach her defenses. The first day passed uneventfully. Amelia prepared meals over an open fire, keeping to herself despite Blake's occasional attempts at conversation. As night fell and the hands settled around the campfire after supper, she busied herself cleaning up, listening absently to the stories and laughter. "Miss Barton," called one of the older hands, Tom Wilson, "you ought to join us. Stargazing's mighty fine tonight." Before she could decline, Blake appeared at her side. "I'll help you finish," he offered, picking up a pot. His fingers brushed against hers, and she pulled back as if burned. "I don't need help," she insisted. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Amelia," he said quietly. "Even you." Later, despite her better judgment, she found herself sitting by the fire, listening as the men shared tales of their travels. When Blake began to play a harmonica, the sweet, melancholy tune drifted across the prairie, stirring something deep in her soul. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked when the song ended and the other hands had drifted off to their bedrolls. Blake gazed into the fire. "My father taught me. It was about the only gentle thing he ever did." A shadow crossed his face. He wasn't an easy man to live with. For the first time, Amelia saw vulnerability in him, and it surprised her. "My father was kind," she offered hesitantly, "until he lost everything in a bad investment. He died of heart failure shortly after." Blake looked at her, understanding in his eyes. "Is that why you came west? To escape?" She nodded slowly. "There was nothing left for me in Kansas City." "There's something freeing about the West," he agreed. "A chance to become who you were meant to be, not who others expected." As they talked beneath the vast canopy of stars, Amelia felt the wall around her heart tremble, just slightly. It scared her how easy it was to talk to him, how he listened without judgment. The second day brought unexpected trouble. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and by midday, rain began to fall in sheets, turning the ground to mud and spooking the cattle. Blake rode tirelessly among the herd, his voice carrying over the storm as he directed the hands to keep the cattle from scattering. Amelia struggled to secure the chuck wagon as the wind threatened to tear away the canvas cover. Suddenly, a particularly fierce gust ripped the heavy fabric from her grasp. Without thinking, she ran after it, slipping in the mud and tumbling down a small embankment. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand. The rain pelted her face as she looked up at the steep, muddy slope, too slick to climb in her condition. "Blake," she called out, but her voice was lost in the howling wind. Panic began to rise within her as the rain intensified and the creek beside her started to swell. She was trapped, injured, and no one knew where she was. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a figure appeared at the top of the embankment. Blake's face, etched with concern, peered down at her. "Are you hurt?" he shouted over the storm. "My ankle," she called back. "I can't climb up." Without hesitation, he began making his way down, sliding and grasping at roots to control his descent. When he reached her, he knelt to examine her ankle, his touch gentle despite his rain-soaked appearance. "It's swelling," he said grimly. "I need to get you back to camp." Before she could protest, He had swept her into his arms, her weight seemingly nothing to him. "Hold on to my neck," he instructed. "This won't be an easy climb." The journey back up the embankment was treacherous. Blake struggled for footing in the mud, his muscles straining as he carried her. Several times they nearly fell, but each time he somehow managed to keep them upright. When they finally reached the top, they were both covered in mud and breathing hard. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "I won't let you fall." Back at camp, inside a hastily erected tent, Blake carefully removed her boot and wrapped her ankle with strips torn from a clean shirt. His hands were strong but gentle, and Amelia found herself watching his face as he worked, noting the furrow of concentration between his brows. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked softly. "I've been nothing but cold to you." Blake looked up, rainwater still dripping from his hair. "Because I see past the walls you've built, Amelia. I see someone who's been hurt but hasn't let it break her." "You don't know me," she whispered. "I'd like to," he replied simply, "if you'd let me." That night, as the storm raged outside, Amelia lay on a makeshift bed, listening to Blake's steady breathing as he slept nearby, having refused to leave her alone. For the first time in months, she didn't feel quite so isolated, and the realization both comforted and frightened her. The morning brought clear skies and a decision from Blake to return to the main ranch rather than continue to the north pasture. Amelia's ankle, while not broken, was badly sprained, and the chuck wagon had sustained damage in the storm. During the journey back, Blake rode alongside the wagon, checking on her frequently. Each time their eyes met, Amelia felt the wall around her heart weaken a little more. "Tell me about Kansas City," he said during one such moment. She hesitated, then decided there was little point in hiding anymore. "I was engaged to be married," she began. "Jonathan Mercer, son of a banker. When my father lost everything, Jonathan waited until our wedding day to tell me he couldn't marry a penniless bride." The memory still stung, but less sharply than before. "The entire church watched me walk out alone." Blake's jaw tightened. "Some men don't deserve the name." "After that, I couldn't stay," she continued. "The whispers, the pity, it was unbearable. So I answered an advertisement for a cook position out west where no one knew me or my shame." "There's no shame in being betrayed," Blake said firmly. "The shame belongs to the man who broke his promise." Their conversation was interrupted by shouts from ahead. A group of riders approached, 6 rough-looking men who positioned themselves in the path of the returning cattle drive. "That's far enough," called the leader, a scarred man with cold eyes. "This here's a toll road now." Blake signaled for the wagon to stop and rode forward. "There's no toll road in these parts, mister." "There is now," the man sneered, revealing a missing tooth. "Price is all your cattle or your lives." Amelia's heart hammered as she watched Blake face down the outlaws. He sat tall in his saddle, seemingly unafraid despite being outnumbered. "We're not looking for trouble," Blake said evenly. "But we're not paying any toll with our herd or otherwise." The leader laughed. "Then I guess we've got a problem." What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion. As the leader reached for his gun, Blake drew faster, firing a warning shot that sent the man's hat flying. The other hands quickly had their weapons out, creating a standoff. 6 against 20, Blake said calmly. "Those aren't odds I'd take. Ride on, and we'll forget this happened." The leader's eyes narrowed as he studied Blake. "Wait a minute. I know you. You're that Remington boy from Colorado. The one who—" "That's enough." Blake cut him off, his voice suddenly hard. "Ride on. Now." Something in his tone must have convinced the outlaws, because after a tense moment, they backed their horses away. "This ain't over, Remington," the leader called as they departed. When Blake returned to the wagon, his face was grim. Amelia could see a change in him, a darkness that hadn't been there before. "Who were they?" she asked quietly. "Trouble," was all he said, turning his horse to give orders to the hands. That night at the ranch, Amelia couldn't sleep. The encounter with the outlaws and the leader's recognition of Blake troubled her. There was clearly more to Blake Remington than he had revealed. Unable to rest, she limped to the kitchen to make some tea, surprised to find Blake sitting alone at the table, a glass of whiskey before him. "You should be resting that ankle," he said without looking up. "So should you be sleeping," she countered, hobbling to the stove. "Some nights sleep doesn't come easy." She studied his profile in the dim lamplight. "Who was that man today? He seemed to know you." Blake was silent for so long that Amelia thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his name is Clyde Daniels. He rode with a gang that raided my family's ranch in Colorado 5 years ago. His knuckles whitened around the glass. They killed my parents and my younger sister. I wasn't there. I was working a cattle drive to Wyoming. Amelia's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. I'm so sorry, Blake. I tracked them for 2 years, he continued, his voice flat. Found 4 of the 6 men responsible. Made sure they faced justice. And Daniels was one of the 2 you never found, she guessed. Blake nodded. Until today. Amelia moved to sit across from him, reaching out to place her hand over his. What will you do? His eyes met hers, filled with a conflict that tore at her heart. What I've wanted to do for 5 years. But not at the expense of this ranch or the people here. He turned his hand to hold hers. I've learned that vengeance burns through everything in its path, including the ones seeking it. Is that how you got that scar on your back? A sad smile touched his lips. Noticed that, did you? Yes. A reminder of what hate can cost. They sat in silence, hands joined across the table, 2 souls who had experienced different pains but found understanding in each other. The next morning, Blake was gone. Mr. Hollis informed everyone that he had ridden out at first light, tracking Daniels and his gang who had reportedly been seen heading toward Pine Shadow. For 3 days, Amelia waited, anxiety growing with each passing hour. She found herself standing on the porch, scanning the horizon for any sign of his return. When questioned about her concern, she merely said she was worried about ranch security with outlaws in the area. But the truth was far more complicated. In Blake's absence, she had been forced to confront the feelings that had taken root in her heart. Somehow, this cowboy with gentle hands and troubled eyes had breached her defenses, making her question her belief that love was nothing but pain waiting to happen. On the evening of the 3rd day, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, a rider appeared in the distance. Amelia's heart leaped as she recognized Blake's silhouette, but her joy quickly turned to concern when she noticed he was slumped forward in the saddle. She hurried toward him as fast as her healing ankle would allow. When he dismounted, she could see blood staining his shirt. You're hurt, she gasped, reaching for him. Blake winced as he straightened. It's not as bad as it looks. Daniel's aim isn't what it used to be. You need tending, she insisted, leading him toward her quarters where she kept medical supplies. Inside, she helped him remove his shirt, revealing a bullet graze across his ribs. As she cleaned the wound, her hands trembled slightly. What happened? She asked, focusing on her task to hide her emotion. I found them in town, Blake explained. Tried to get the sheriff to arrest them, but Daniels drew first. There was a gunfight. He paused. Daniels won't be troubling anyone anymore. Amelia looked up at him. And you? Are you at peace now? Blake considered the question. Not peace exactly, but I've closed a chapter that needed ending. His eyes held hers. I realized something while I was facing him. I wasn't fighting just for my family's memory anymore. I was fighting to come back here, to you. Her hands stilled on his skin. Blake, I know you've been hurt, he said softly. I know you believe love only leads to pain. But Amelia, not all men are like the one who betrayed you. And not all women can trust so easily again, she whispered, tears threatening. Blake took her hand, pressing it against his heart. Then we'll take it slowly, day by day. I'm not asking for promises, just a chance. The next few weeks brought a gradual thawing between them. Blake respected her need for space, while finding small ways to show his care, bringing wildflowers for her table, helping with heavy tasks around the kitchen, sharing stories of his travels during quiet evening moments. For her part, Amelia found herself looking forward to his visits, the comfort of his presence becoming something she craved rather than avoided. Little by little, she shared more of herself, her dreams before her father's financial ruin, her love of poetry, her hope of someday having a home of her own. As autumn deepened and the first frost touched the land, Blake invited her to ride with him to a hidden valley he'd discovered while tracking strays. Despite her lingering uncertainty, Amelia agreed. The valley was breathtaking, protected from the wind by tall cliffs and warmed by the midday sun. A small stream wound through it, bordered by trees still clinging to their golden leaves. It's beautiful, Amelia breathed as they dismounted. I thought you might like it, Blake said, spreading a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree. He produced a simple picnic from his saddlebags, bread, cheese, dried apples, and a small jar of honey. As they ate, Blake grew uncharacteristically quiet, seeming lost in thought. "What's troubling you?" Amelia finally asked. He met her eyes, a vulnerability in his gaze that touched her deeply. "I've been offered a position as foreman on a ranch near here. Good pay, my own cabin." "That's wonderful," she said, trying to ignore the pang in her heart at the thought of him leaving the broken spoke. "I'm going to take it," he continued. "But I've been thinking about what comes after." After, Blake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it in his closed fist. "My mother had a saying, that home isn't a place, it's where your heart finds rest." He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold ring. "My heart has found its rest with you, Amelia." She stared at the ring, emotions warring within her, hope and fear, longing and doubt. "I know you're afraid," he said softly. "I know you believe love will only hurt you again. But I'm asking you to trust not just in me, but in yourself, in your strength to risk your heart once more." Tears filled her eyes. "What if I can't be what you need?" "You already are," he answered simply. "You're brave enough to keep going after being broken, strong enough to build a new life far from everything familiar, kind enough to mend not just my shirt, but parts of me I thought beyond repair." Blake took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm asking you to consider a future where we face whatever comes together." That evening, as Amelia sat alone on her porch, the ring safely tucked in her pocket, she found herself at a crossroads. Could she truly open herself to love again? The very thought made her tremble with both yearning and fear. A tear in her own shirt caught her attention, a small rip along the seam that she hadn't noticed before. As she examined it, Blake's words echoed in her mind. "You mended not just my shirt, but parts of me I thought beyond repair." Perhaps that was the nature of love, not the perfect union she had once imagined, but the careful mending of two imperfect hearts, creating something stronger at the broken places. The next morning, she found Blake in the stable, preparing to ride to town. When he saw her, he paused, hope and uncertainty mingling in his eyes. "I've been thinking about your offer," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "And?" he asked quietly. Amelia took a deep breath. "For so long, I believed that loving someone meant risking too much, that I would never be whole again if love failed me a second time." She stepped closer to him. "But I realize now that I stopped living when I stopped risking my heart." Blake set down the saddle he'd been holding, his full attention on her. "I can't promise I won't be afraid," she continued. "I can't promise there won't be days when doubts haunt me. I don't need perfect promises," Blake said. "Just honest ones." Amelia reached into her pocket and withdrew the ring. "Then honestly, Blake Remington, I would be honored to build a life with you, to make a home where both our hearts can rest." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He closed the distance between them, taking her face gently in his hands. "May I?" he whispered, his gaze dropping to her lips. Her answer was to rise on tiptoes, pressing her mouth to his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long, lonely journey. Spring, 1886. Wildflowers carpeted the valley as Amelia stood before the small cabin Blake had built with his own hands on land adjoining the ranch where he now served as foreman. White curtains fluttered at the windows, and a garden plot waited for the vegetables she would plant. Inside, Blake hung the last of the shelves he had crafted for her kitchen. He stepped back to examine his work, then turned to find her watching him from the doorway. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing to the cabin that had been their labor of love throughout the winter. Amelia crossed to him, sliding her arms around his waist. "I think it's perfect. Our own piece of the West." He kissed her forehead, then her lips. "No regrets about marrying a simple cowboy?" "None," she answered truthfully. In the months since their wedding, a small affair witnessed by the hands of the broken spoke and a few townsfolk from Pine Shadow, Amelia had discovered that love could indeed flourish in the harsh frontier, that two wounded souls could find healing in each other. Blake's fingers toyed with the simple gold band on her finger. "You know, when I asked you to mend my shirt that day, I never imagined we'd end up here." Amelia smiled, remembering. "You told me later that you tore it on purpose, just to have a reason to talk to me." He laughed. "Guilty as charged. Best strategic tear I ever made." As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of their new home, Amelia thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a torn shirt to mended hearts, from isolation to belonging. "I love you, Blake Remington," she said, the words coming easily now, no longer frightening. His arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Amelia Remington, until the last star falls from the sky." Outside, spring winds whispered through the valley that would shelter their love and the family they would build together, a testament to the truth that even in the wild, untamed West, hearts could find their way home.